Say Carry podcast. Those of you who have followed the show in the past know we have been out of pocket for a while. So I'm your host, Sal, with my co-host, Luke. We're back. Do you know about how long it's been, Luke? It's been a while, a few months at least. So.
In a few months. I think we kind of stopped during the summer and then turned into the fall. And then I'm like, all right, let's get back on and get on the horse.
So as it turns out, there's always plenty to talk about, Luke. You would think maybe we'd go a few months and there's nothing to talk about. Well, what do you know? Not quite.
Yeah. And we had this scheduled and I didn't even realize it was for Tuesday. But that was kind of, you were busy that night. I think a lot of us were busy that night.
Yeah, I think
Election
we kind of
night.
forgot, right, what was going on Tuesday night. And here we are now 2 nights later in a very different political landscape, which is pretty interesting, which may or may not, change things. Actually, what we're going to talk about tonight, not really. It's a topic that we meant to hit a few months ago when things were looking kind of scary in the world. But what's interesting about what we're going to discuss tonight is this is a constant and the more likely threat that we face that can, though, be motivated by things that happen internationally or domestically and politically. But it's always with us, unfortunately. So
right. Yeah. I just looked in the outline for this show that you had made was in the end of May. End of May. So, but it all still applies.
Yes,
so,
absolutely. So
pick it right back up from where we left off.
Yeah, exactly. So tonight we're going to discuss lone wolf attacks, what that is, what it looks like. The majority of the active killer, active shooter, whatever we want to refer to those, most often they're shootings, right? Not always. Sometimes we've seen vehicle attacks, explosives, edged weapons attacks.
Yeah.
So the majority that we have seen in our nation's history, and the truth is the majority that take place around the world, are lone wolf attacks.
Right. And then kind of getting into, what's that mean for the armed citizen?
Right.
Which,
exactly.
That's us.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about what a lone wolf attack is. So what that refers to is it may be an act of violence that is that is motivated by ideology, okay? But it is conducted by a single actor or sometimes maybe a couple of people. It's typically going to be a single individual or possibly a couple of individuals or a very small group. So as opposed to think of a large-scale attack like 9/11 where you have a terror cell doing that. That's different. That's not a lone wolf attack. That's an actual terrorist organization of some kind behind the action, funding, training, etc., the actual perpetrators. Whereas a lone wolf attack is going to be, again, most often a single individual who may swear allegiance to some kind of nefarious group when they do the action, but they are entirely funded and self-motivated. Does that make sense?
It does, because I had some of those questions for you before we started this. What's the difference? Are you distinguishing between a lone wolf attack versus an active shooter? Are they one and the same?
So they can be one and the same. So the mechanism of violence doesn't really matter. So we've seen lone wolf attacks such as the Boston bombing, which was a couple of individuals setting off explosives. We've seen lone wolf vehicle attacks. We saw that a number of years ago. I want to say Colorado, I forget, where a guy drove into a crowd right on the sidewalk. I believe he killed 7 people. And of course, within the continental United States, most often it's going to be an active shooter attack.
Got it. And so what's on next on here was, why are they challenging to detect?
Yeah, so that probably seems self-evident, right? Because why they're going to be much more challenging to detect and stop is because it is, again, usually a single individual, maybe a very small group of individuals that are autonomous in their actions. So they're planning it. Most of these things get planned for a long time, whether it's the high school shootings we've seen, where a student or ex-student plans it, or if it's a terrorist-related thing, very often it's weeks, if not months, of planning. However, the individual is often doing it alone. So instead of being able to trace communications, money
Hmm.
flow, etc., to an actual designated nefarious group, there's none of that. There's just the individual.
Right.
That is why these typically slip through law enforcement much more readily than actual terror cells of some kind that have tried attacks in the past.
Yeah. Makes sense. Um, I know we touched on one or two, but do you want to go over the history of
Yeah,
lone wolf
absolutely.
incidents?
So, yeah,
Like
which,
the Pulse nightclub, I think, was the first one we had on the
exactly.
list.
So,
So,
some things I'll point out about these. I'll take our audience through a few to consider. The Pulse
okay.
nightclub. That
Hmm.
was the largest
2016.
fatality rate in any mass shooting prior to the Las Vegas shooting. I want to say
Hmm.
Pulse happened only like a year before the Las Vegas shooting. I'd have to look at the exact dates, but it was
I'll
pretty
be your
close.
Jamie and Google that for you.
Yeah, okay. So Pulse nightclub was a single individual who went to a nightclub, of course, in Orlando, Florida, I believe, and he
Hmm.
killed over 50 people with a rifle. And again, that stood as by far the worst mass shooting in our history. Shortly, though, overtaken by the Las Vegas massacre, where
And there
the
was,
guy was up in the hotel shooting down on the
yeah,
crowd.
and that was in 2017. So you're right. It was a year after that. I didn't look at the months, but we'll call it a year.
Okay. Okay. So Pulse nightclub was 2017 or Las Vegas?
Its Pulse was in 2016, and the Las Vegas shooting was in 2019,
Okay.
October 1st, 2019. And Pulse shooting was on June 12th, 2016. So, couple months,
Okay.
and a year,
So
year and a couple months.
the Pulse nightclub is sort of a classic example of this.
Hmm.
You have a lone actor who it has been designated a terror attack because he swore allegiance to ISIS only right prior to the attack. So that's what
Right.
makes this kind of interesting. So he was a lone wolf operator. He was not in touch with the ISIS terror group. He was not communicating with them prior to this. I think he looked at like some of their crazy like indoctrination material and that kind of stuff,
Okay.
obviously. But he was not being
That was on his
funded.
own.
Yes, he was on his own.
Right.
He's not being funded by them. He's autonomous. He chose the club only because it was a target of opportunity. There was a lot of speculation at first. Well, not even speculation. It was really the narrative that he chose it because it was a gay nightclub. It turned out that had
Right.
nothing to do with it. It's because he had several options in mind, and this was the best one for him, the way he looked at it, being able to rack up a large body count. So it had nothing to do with that it was a gay nightclub. It was just a lot of people in there. And he went
Yep.
in, committed the attack. He was, of course, killed on scene. And then they uncover all this later on. So,
And he shot and killed 49 people, wounded 53 more.
yeah,
That's
it was horrendous.
huge.
It was horrendous. And
Yeah.
it was long and drawn out. He was in there for several hours. This was a perfect example of you are on your own. And
Mhm.
I don't remember if we had this conversation, maybe on the old CCX2 show. Um, I had the conversation somewhere. I think it was with you and Brandon, where,
Yes.
if you're looking at nights out on the town, this would be a great example of having a designated concealed carrier. It can be your designated driver that works out
Yeah, we've
perfect,
talked
right? The
about it.
guy who stays sober in the club and he's armed, because you're
Hmm.
on your own in a situation like that. He came in with a rifle blazing. He actually shot it out with a guard out front before he made it in, but the guard did not stop him. He made it in, and it was a huge massacre. There were people for hours hiding in the bathrooms, texting their loved ones, texting 911, etc. So this was a real good example of, as aggressively as he attacked, as many people as he killed very quickly when he initially came in. We've been through this before. The whole argument, oh, a
Hmm.
rifle and you only have a handgun. Yeah, but he's a sitting duck. He's looking at a whole bunch of targets he's trying to kill. And if you're in
Right.
close proximity, somebody in there with a handgun could have dumped him real quickly.
Yep. For sure.
Yep. So that was a perfect example of lone wolf. So, before we touch on the others, something I want to mention, because I think
Sure.
it's important that people understand this. These attacks often manifest in a very similar way. So the Pulse nightclub attack is really no different. The ideology doesn't really make a difference in the violence that's actually committed. So the Pulse nightclub, if you look at the Church of Christ shooting in Texas that Stephen Williford stopped,
Hmm.
the Las Vegas massacre, etc., all different ideologies motivating it. But that is besides the point when it actually happens. So one thing I like to explain when we touch on this subject is, you have a lot of people who like to say, oh, the United States, we're just another country. We're exceptional in so many ways. And one of those ways is that, unlike countries in Europe, our immigrants actually assimilate. Now, that's not discussing, the open border and, the mass of illegal immigrants. That's different.
Right.
When we're talking about legal immigration. So my point
Right.
with that is almost every demographic, and I did an article on this a long time ago looking at the FBI stats. This was like in 2017, 2018, before the world really went crazy post-COVID, right?
Hmm.
The FBI traces the statistics of, ethnic, religious groups, etc., behind mass attacks or all kinds of crime, right? And what's
Hmm.
interesting with mass attacks is every ethnicity and religious group in this country contributes almost an equal share to this phenomenon, which is very, very interesting. So, as an example,
Okay.
American Muslims do not commit more mass attacks. I remind everybody, the guys who carried out 9/11, they were not Americans, right? They were foreigners here in some school program that was their cover while they were here,
Right.
right? Okay, so American Muslims do not contribute more mass attacks than any other group. And what's very fascinating is other groups that might be prone to be overrepresented in other kind of crime still do not commit more mass attacks per their population. Okay, not to bring up divisive things in any way, but these are stats we know, right? African American
Right.
gang crime is a big problem. Uh, Hispanic gang crime is a big problem. But those demographics, when you look at mass attacks, there is no further contribution per their numbers as related to the whole population, and this is really, really fascinating. So
Yeah. It's interesting.
what it means is you have some demographics who commit certain kinds of more mundane crime, whether it's gang on gang stuff, drug trafficking, etc. But mass attacks breaks down almost perfectly to their actual population representation. So, for example,
Hmm.
African Americans are about 14% of the population. They account for about 14% of lone wolf mass killings. Hispanics are whatever it is, 30% now or something similar. American, Arabs and Muslims are, pretty small percentage. They're only like 2%. Similar, about
Okay.
2% is what they contribute. So what's really fascinating about that is it tells you every demographic of human being basically has the same number of true psychopaths, that it has running around, right? Now, how it will manifest differently is what their ideology is. So, as an example, back to the more jihadi terrorist thing, when you get a lone
Hmm.
wolf actor, you'll get a guy like this Pulse nightclub guy, in the United States. I believe he was in the United States all his life. Um, never shows any kind of violent tendencies until he plans this attack, and then he swears allegiance to jihadi terror group, right?
Yep.
Whereas,
Born in Orlando, 29
yes,
years old.
yeah, whereas your average white dude who goes in and shoots up his workplace or whatever, it'll be some other crackpot idea where, like, whatever, the girls weren't nice to him or something. Like, so it'll be these different, like, ideologies that manifest, but the contribution per capita, it's really interesting how that breaks down. Again,
Yeah.
we are not talking about foreign actors infiltrated into this country to commit terrorism. That's totally different. We're
Mhm.
talking about our domestic citizen population.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I didn't know those stats.
Yep.
That's why I have you on.
Yeah. Well, I always found that very interesting. So this is the
Right.
more pervasive threat that can happen at any time. And obviously, as everybody can see, it can come equally from really any ethnic or religious demographic.
Right.
The only consistency is its vast majority is predominantly male perpetrators, with some exceptions. Okay.
Yeah, you've got one on here. I think it was it husband, wife?
Yes,
Or,
correct. San
was that the
Bernardino.
San Bernardino one,
Yep.
2015?
There's relatively few exceptions of females being involved with this kind of attack. San Bernardino was one of the exceptions here. So what we had here was a guy and wife who
Mhm.
committed a mass attack on his workplace during a Christmas party.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about this was a jihadi thing where he was sort of indoctrinated. Apparently, the investigation showed that the wife had a lot to do with his indoctrination
Interesting.
into terror. I don't recall if they specifically swore. Again, it was lone wolf. So at that time, that was before ISIS, and I don't think he was affiliated with Al Qaeda. Again, it was sort of a lone wolf thing where they just, went on. The manifestation for them was this jihadi
Right.
rampage, right? So this was an interesting one. They went in, I want to say they killed like 14 people at the party. And then they were in an SUV, and the cops finally chased them down, and there was a massive shootout in the streets where the police killed them on the highway.
Yeah. Yeah, 16 including them. So 14 and wounded or injured 24.
Mhm. You know what's a good example of this one, Luke, is
Mm.
as concealed carriers, right?
Yeah.
Put yourself there at that party. Now we're not dealing with the much more typical single perpetrator. We're dealing with two people. They were wearing armor and they have
Mhm.
rifles, right? That's a task. That's a task to
Yeah,
be
you're
up
behind
against
the
that.
curve a little bit
Yeah,
there.
you're definitely behind the curve with that, and one of the accounts that I read years ago after that happened was the first responders who got there. I want to say it was a nearby. I don't think he was in uniform. It was like a detective or something that was fairly nearby. So he went in there in just like a suit, with his handgun, of course, and talking about how you could smell the gunpowder still hanging in the air. This was indoors and just, blood everywhere, bodies everywhere, and
Mhm.
think through something like that, the absolute chaos,
Right.
the noise,
Yeah,
unsuppressed rifles inside a building like that. It's going to rattle your cage.
yeah. I'm not seeing anything about that. It said it took them police 3 minutes and 32 seconds for the first unit to get
Pretty
there.
fast response,
Yeah. 2 officers. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, seconds count when they're minutes away, right? So in 3 minutes,
Yeah.
if you're there on your own, and realistically, if you're at something like an office party, if you have the option to be armed at all, realistically, you're
Mhm.
probably carrying something small, you know,
Right.
So what
If
are you?
anything at all.
Yeah,
It's a Christmas office party. How many people are going to have a few drinks and
exactly right.
celebrate
Exactly
Christmas?
right.
So there's that too.
This is a perfect example of you want to know where those exits are, and you want to be switched on. You want to be the person who
How many people there had concealed carry permits that just weren't carrying?
could be.
you
This
know?
is California, though.
True. Yeah, true.
You know, It's funny how
Very
these,
true.
you know,
And California in 2015. So yeah,
yeah,
you're right.
exactly. You know, so this is an example of you want to be out that door real quick when it happens. You know, don't say to yourself, "Oh, it's
Mhm.
fireworks." You know, you don't want to be that person. You want to move. So
Right.
that's an interesting example of lone wolf attack. What else do we have there? Boston Marathon.
Yep.
This is
We had the Boston Marathon.
yeah.
Two brothers planned it, I think, or something, right?
Yes, really good example of this. So this is an incident where the initial attack was explosives used, which in the continental United States is pretty rare. You
Right.
know, the all the anti-gunners, you know, I remind some of those people sometimes, be careful what you wish for, because in a lot of other countries internationally, we see explosive attacks. And, you know, if you're right near the device, you don't have much say in the matter. You know,
No.
especially if you're armed, you have a lot more say in the matter when you're dealing with people armed with firearms, you know. So this was really interesting. Probably most of our audience, I would think, is pretty familiar with it. They
Right.
made the bombs out of pressure cookers. Really good movie about it. Did you see the movie, Luke, with Mark Wahlberg in it? I think what's it called? It's called Patriots Day.
Yeah, I have seen
Yeah,
that.
really good
It's
movie.
been a minute.
Yeah,
Yeah.
about the event. Because
I was
after
about to
they,
say no, and I had Mark Wahlberg in my head right before you said it. So yeah, I've seen that. It's just been a while.
yeah, so after they planted the initial devices, I want to say Netflix has, yeah, it's Netflix. They have a series about these kind of attacks that have been thwarted and then investigated, the ones that happened by the FBI. I forget the name of the
Like a
series.
documentary
Yeah, it's
series
a
kind of thing.
documentary series. The
Okay.
episode about this event was really, really good. They go into details about how, you know, they were looking at the different surveillance footage throughout the crowds to really try to pinpoint who dropped that package. That's
Yeah.
where they honed in on the younger brother. So
Interesting.
this particular event is really interesting when it comes to, and we say interesting, I mean, these are horrific things, you know, but
Yeah.
when we talk
Yeah.
about them, we have to kind of be, you know, kind of in the research mode, you know, and people should do
Right.
that if you want to educate yourself about these things. So,
Was this just real quick
yeah,
before you go? Was this a series on the bombing and other stuff? I see like
yes.
American Manhunt, the
Oh, it might have been
Boston.
that. It might have been like a several part series just on this event.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a number of them. There's a
Well,
number of,
if anybody's interested, it's called
yes.
American
Yeah, I
Manhunt,
think that's the
Boston
one.
Marathon
Yeah,
bombing. Yeah.
that's the one. Really good. Really well done. Lots of information. Um, so what, and that goes into some information about the actual indoctrination that went on. So it turned out it's the older brother who was the mastermind. The younger brother's
Okay.
kind of indoctrinated in and, you know, helps him. But again, it's lone wolf. So the older brother's kind of reaching out to resources online, getting radicalized. But again, he was self-seeking. He was seeking it out.
Hmm.
And something that comes up in that series, so I'm gonna have to lose the hat. It's warm in here. Something that comes up in that series that people should be mindful of is there is a psychology in all of these guys that is exactly the same. So with the
Hmm.
Tsarnaev brothers, the older brother who was the mastermind, they were, I can't remember if they were born in the United States or they were very young when they got here, one or the other. So, you know, they're fully American. They grow up
Right.
in Boston, right? Um, he was a successful high school wrestler, good athlete, etc. He failed to achieve some wrestling achievement, and all of a
Okay.
sudden he goes off the deep end. And he starts in with the trend that is the foundation for every single mass violent attack. Want me to tell everybody what that is? Every single
What
one.
was it, Sal?
um, Victimization. The mentality
Gotcha.
of victimization, that you are a victim of something. And
Mhm.
every single one of these incidents, no matter how it manifests, in this case, you've got a young Middle Eastern guy, so it turns into a jihadi thing.
Mhm.
In the case of, the Las Vegas attack, that one, they never really had any idea what that was about. But
Right.
think of like the Columbine, right, which
Mhm.
kicked off the disgusting trend of the school shootings. In every single mass attack, there is this element of victimization, that the perpetrator is convinced they are victimized by society. You know, the Tsarnaev brothers is a very weird thing. Like, he gets passed over some athletic achievement, right?
Mhm.
And all of a sudden he goes off the deep end.
That's I'd heard
Yeah,
about that.
yeah.
Right.
The Pulse nightclub, it was the same thing. The San Bernardino thing, he was getting radicalized for a while, but then it turns out there's like work issues and all this. Till now, most mass shootings still in this country are, excluding the gang related stuff that they throw into mass shootings, obviously, excluding that, is workplace
Right.
shootings, right? So again, there
Mhm.
is victimization with the school thing. He's always claiming that he was bullied, etc. So the self victimization, the victimology, that's really how I refer to it. That is an exceedingly diabolical and dark and dangerous psychology for somebody to get into. We
For
see it in
sure.
entire movements in the world. You have terrorism in different countries, whether it's, Middle Eastern countries or things that have happened in Asia. Um, the IRA, remember the Irish Republican Army,
Mhm.
so the victimization might be real or imagined. For example,
Right.
the actual cause of the IRA, a lot of people could totally sympathize with that. We don't want to be part of the British realm, the UK. We don't want to be
Right.
part of it. Um, but when you plant bombs in cafes and kill women and children in cafe, you lose public support really quick, right?
Right.
So the victimization might be a whole movement, or it can manifest in just the individual. And every time you
Right.
see one of these lone wolf actors play out the mass casualty event, there is months, if not years, of an idea of victimology in this individual. They are a victim of something. They're a victim of, you've heard of the whole incel thing. Okay, most of
Yeah.
these guys, again, like the jihadi ones, tend to be interesting events to study, but the vast majority of these are actually this, I don't know how to put it. It's always losers. It's like just white guys who are losers, and you'll hear a lot about incels and all
That's one
this,
way to put it. Yeah.
involuntarily celibate and stuff. And they're just mad at the world. Maybe they feel they're passed over for different opportunities. Maybe, women are not nice to them. It's a whole variety of asinine, stupid things, but it's always this
Right.
very dark psychology of victimology. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, um, what are the other ones there you wanted to talk about?
Um, we had the Oklahoma City bombing on here, the attack on Steve Scalise, and that was the last two
Yeah,
incidents.
you know what?
And then just going over common themes.
Oklahoma City bombing is a great example. Okay, it's like we talk about jihadi terrorist things. We talk about the school workplace stuff. Here's one, right? Oklahoma City. Now, I would say most of the kind of events we've always discussed in this capacity are going to fall into either like terrorist stuff or like extreme left wing ideology. Here's a perfect example of, if people get on us about being partisan and stuff, hey, violence comes from every sector. This is extreme right
Yep.
wing ideology that led to
Right.
this, right? You
Right.
had a guy who plants a bomb, a whole truck bomb in front of the
Yeah.
FBI building in retaliation for Waco, Texas, and Ruby Ridge. Two absolute horrific incidences, both of which that were started and mishandled by none other than the ATF. And then the FBI actually got dragged into both and took the blame. It was actually the ATF that started both incidents. But think about the psychology of that. Okay, so we've got extreme right-wing ideology, hatred for the government, and a hatred for the FBI, which at this time is probably felt by a lot of people like a hatred for certain agencies. But again, we come back to this disgusting mentality of you're going to plant a truck bomb in front of a building where there's a daycare in the building. I think it was 20-some children got killed in this attack. And it is just this kind of mayhem that these guys, when they get into this mentality, they are willing to take human life. And it all comes back to this victimology, right? Whether it's you associate with being a victim of your own government, you associate with being a victim of your workplace, society in general, it all comes back to a similar psychosis.
Yep. And the last one, the attack on Congressman Steve Scalise.
So there's extreme left-wing ideology, right? Yeah, extreme left-wing ideology, right? Attacking a conservative Congress critter. And, here we are, how many months after coming up with that initial outline, look at the assassination on Trump. Now, that's a really interesting one. I have a feeling, Luke, that it'll go down in history just like the JFK assassination, where were there active conspiracy? Was there something behind it, or was he a lone wolf? And here's what I'll tell people, because
and there was the other one that they caught the guy.
Yes,
so there was 2 incidents.
Yeah, absolutely. So
you didn't hear much about that.
No, not as much, obviously, because he didn't get a shot off. But
but still,
here's what I would submit, though. Either could be true. So, RFK, who's now one of Trump's guys, right? He swears up and down that the CIA killed his father, who, of course, was JFK, Bobby Kennedy.
Right.
So what I would say about these things, though, we probably both lean more towards the tinfoil hat side of things and say, yeah, there's something to it,
Sure.
But both are viable. And that's what I want to remind people of. So the kid who shot at Trump, he was a total incompetent, which leads me more to think he was just a lone wolf. I mean, if the CIA recruited that guy, they really picked a lousy shooter. I mean, what in the world? I could take you down to the local indoor range and find 10 guys immediately who would do a better job. So it's that kind of thing. So I think it's very viable. It's a lone actor who's all whipped up with all the rhetoric. So either way you go with those, it's viable. I remember decades ago when I was a kid watching a documentary about the JFK assassination. And my father always, who of course, lived through it, he was always convinced the guy was just a lone actor. Whereas my grandfather was convinced, it was the mob or the CIA, whoever he thought at the time.
Oh,
yeah, both. But what I thought was interesting was this particular documentary from decades ago went into detail about the actual shot made. And the shot Oswald made, if he was indeed the only shooter who made the 2 shots, they were hard shots to make, but they were doable. So are there people who are willing to go through those extremes to kill a high-profile politician? There absolutely is. So I think either is viable. Is there a conspiracy behind it? Absolutely viable. Or could it be a lone actor? Absolutely viable. And right there is an example of, was it lone wolf or was it an operation of some kind?
Right.
No,
we may never know.
Yeah, we'll probably never know. This will probably be the same thing, just like the JFK assassination. We'll just never know the truth.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
So I am just
So
looking through. Okay, we talked about
yeah,
radicalization of them. Yep.
we talked about challenges of prevention. Um,
Yes, and that is a big
yeah,
theme of this. These are the ones that are much more likely to slip through because there's just
yeah,
not much of a trail there to be picked up on. Very often, after the fact, it turns out the guy is on the radar of either local law
mhm,
enforcement or the FBI. Um, you've covered so many things, right?
right, yeah.
On USA Carry, how often would you estimate you see that with anything that is like a premeditated attack? How often would you estimate you're seeing that they're already on the radar prior?
I mean, not often. Most of the stuff we're covering is just, you know,
More random
daily incidents.
interpersonal
Yeah,
violence? Okay,
home invasions, on the street, robberies, that kind of stuff.
right. They're probably
There was
often
something.
criminals with a rap sheet, but not necessarily like on the radar.
There was a shooting recently that I believe, wasn't it, where the dad like bought the kid the gun?
Mm.
What, didn't the FBI had already talked to him or
Yep.
looked into
Yep,
him? Wasn't
exactly right.
right?
Yeah,
So
he killed a
that was
couple of
a
people in the
recent one.
school. Yep. And the
Yeah,
father is currently awaiting trial, I think.
yeah. Didn't yeah, that's the one that had the gun in the bag when they were like talking to the school and they let him go or something
Yeah, it
with
was
the
the same
parents.
thing.
I'm forgetting the exact
The
details.
classic example is the Florida shooting. What's his name? I hate mentioning their names. Cruz, the kid who shot Stoneman Douglas, right? Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida. He killed 18 of his classmates, something like that. He had been visited by law enforcement. It was something staggering, over 50 times. So extremely troubled.
Right.
Far be it from me to defend the FBI. Obviously, again, we're in a different place than we were years ago, right?
Mhm.
I'm hoping that is an institution that also has a very celebrated history, right? So I'm hoping it can come back to that, but as of now,
Right.
there's a lot of mistrust in the FBI. But here's what I would say. So far be it from me to defend them in any capacity, but we live in a free republic where you can't just put people in prison, right? And I always remind
Mhm.
people of that, right?
Right.
So he's been investigated, he's on their radar. Yeah, but what is that? What does
What did
that
he
mean?
do?
What did he do?
Right.
Like, at what point do you want to say we can just throw this kid in prison because we think he's weird and he's acting threatening?
Like that's getting to what Minority Report
Yes,
stuff. Isn't
right,
that
right.
right? Like
So a
yeah.
lot of times this
What they
happens,
call
and
that pre-crimes?
yeah, yeah, exactly. And a lot of times when this happens, and everybody's like, he was on their radar. They again dropped the ball. They did nothing. I say, do you want to live in a country where we are preemptively imprisoning people? So I
Nope.
really think people need to think that one through. But the point is, very often they're on the radar, so there's something very, very off there. And that's how they
Yeah.
always are. I shouldn't say always, because there's been some, again, the Tsarnaevs brothers, that was a good example of two kids who were pretty social and well liked. It's like they were liked at the school. They were
Mhm.
athletes. They were liked like in their mosque and all this kind of stuff. And then
And then
yeah, they start acting weird. Like that documentary goes into like the imam at the mosque is like, okay, this guy's acting really weird all of a sudden. Then he just like disappears. He doesn't come anymore.
mm,
So like sometimes they are kind of normal up until a breaking point, but a lot of times it is just chronic from childhood. They're off.
right.
It's a lot of times similar to the serial killer profile, cruelty to animals, that kind of thing.
Right.
You know, so yeah, a lot to unpack there, but just touching on it. One thing I would say, if we've probably all met people in our life that give us the creeps. We've probably all known the person. Have you ever known a person like this that in the workplace you're like, yeah, if anybody ever shoots up the office, it's going to be that guy?
You're like, it's gonna be that guy. Yeah. I can't put my finger on any. I mean, I've been working out my own home office
Yeah,
for
I
about over
understand. But
15 years.
have you ever just encountered people where you can
Yeah, I
just
know what you mean. Yeah.
subconsciously you can tell they're off? I'll share an anecdote about
Mhm.
that. Um, One of the earlier real mass casualty events was the Luby's Cafeteria shooting in Texas, in Kylene, Texas, in 91 or 92, early
Okay.
90s. Had a big influence on me.
I think you've talked about that
I
before. It
have,
sounds familiar.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's in my book too. I have a
Yep.
thing, a
I've
write
read
up
it. Yeah.
about this because, and this is gonna,
Which the name of your book is?
yeah, 21st Century Minuteman, right? So I have
I'll
a
put a
whole,
link to it on
yeah, I
Amazon
have a
in the
whole
description.
section about mass killing events like this, and I go into the pertinent details about a lot of these events. So Luby's Cafeteria left a big influence on me because I was a kid. I was like 12 years old, but I remember reading in the newspaper witness accounts of the event. This is like within days of it happening. And it always stuck
Hmm.
with me how one of the survivors said that he told the press when they were interviewing him that this guy, he drove his truck right in through the front plate glass windows, jumped out with two handguns, and started killing people. I want to say he killed 24, 25 people, something like that, wounded about the same amount as well.
Okay.
So he said that the whole event took about 10 minutes and people just laid down on the floor, hiding under the tables while this guy walked up and down the aisles executing people.
Right.
And he would say things to people too while he was doing it. Eventually, somebody got up, threw a table through a window, and people started evacuating.
Good.
So, this was a perfect example of if you don't think about it and if you don't train for it, you're going to go into the mindset of how could this be happening? How could this be happening? I don't have a
Yep.
parking
What?
space in my mind for what this
Mhm.
is and how to react to it. You know, and that always stuck with me. I go into detail in the book about that, but in that particular incident, back to the anecdote about it, this gets even more interesting. So I was interested in that event since I was a child. It was kind of
Mhm.
influential on me understanding the mindset that's involved with self-defense and personal protection, right? Fast forward years later, I am in a particular job where a guy I'm working with who was probably um, 15, 20 years my senior. We
Okay.
start talking about that event, how I was, how it left an impression on me as a child. And he said, "You never believe it." He was in the service, he was stationed at the base there. I forget which base it is. He knew the guy who committed the crime.
Wow.
And he was in a different regiment or whatever it is. I'm not a military guy. I don't know. But like not his exact company. It was the
Company,
next one
regiment,
over, right?
whatever. Okay.
He's in the barracks in the break room. And it comes up on CNN, the headlines of what's happening, or whatever it was. I think it was CNN, whatever it was, the big network in the early 90s. And when the
Yeah.
headline comes up, he looks at his friend in the break room with him and he says, "Oh, I bet it's so and so."
And it was.
And it was so and so.
That's crazy.
So, in other words, they had this impression from this other military guy, because he was an active military guy, the guy who committed
Okay.
this heinous killing, that rubbed them in a wrong way, but not in a way they could pinpoint and put their finger on. But there was something about this guy that when he saw that headline, that was his first reaction. So
Hmm.
I just want to throw that out there to people. If there's somebody in your workplace, which is the most likely place you're going to find this, talk to your children in
Yeah.
the high school. If there's that guy, there's just something wrong. Listen to that. There's a
Yeah.
reason.
Listen to your gut,
Yes,
right?
go with your gut. There's a reason that you're picking up on that.
Right.
Isn't that interesting?
No, makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. And you were just talking about like, training for things, and I just thought about Kelly McCann. He was that our first episode with him where he was talking about, you got to train for this stuff. your adrenaline goes
Yeah.
up
Oh
the
yeah.
more you train for
Oh
it, the
yeah. I
more
mean, he is
you're
a
used to it.
yeah, he
Yeah.
is a big proponent of that, and he's a been there, done that guy, and he does.
Right.
What's interesting about him, I need to reach back out to him and get him back on the show. Is he
Hmm.
does so much. So he not only, he is known as like the combatives guy historically. What's
Right.
interesting about him, Luke, and I think we had this discussion with him, is he was really the first high profile guy to put a red dot on, on his pistol.
Oh, was he?
Yes, people don't realize that on like a carry pistol, not doing it competition, that predates that.
Right.
On a carry pistol,
Right.
he was the guy who innovated that. Then, like Gabe Suarez and some other guys came really
Mhm.
after that, but really it was Kelly who did that first. And
Interesting.
he does a whole variety of things. So he teaches vehicle courses. He teaches escape and evasion courses. I want to take that one that he does. I live within a couple hours of his training facility. I should get back and do more. I got so beat up in his combatives class that I haven't gone back for any of that, especially with
Right.
my back condition. But his escape and invasion, that looks really interesting. So my point is, when he talks about like you have to train for it, he knows what he's talking about. And it can
Mhm.
be training in all these different ways. And one part of your training doesn't just have to be physical. It is simply thinking through it. I had the very good opportunity to train with William April, who was a criminal psychologist, and he was a big figure in the self-defense world, was a great
Mhm.
shooter. I mean, a bad dude. That guy, he tragically died. He was only in his 50s when he passed. I was able to take his class literally like within 6 months of him passing. So I'm really glad I
Really.
took it. So he taught a full day class on the criminal psychology, dealing with criminals, their thought process, how they approach, all these different kind of things. But he was a sheriff before he started his own clinical practice, and he dealt
Mhm.
with guys in the prison. So he knew what he was doing. He wasn't some strictly intellectual guy, some kind of tree hugger with a bunch of theories. He was a guy who
Right.
he's one of the only people I knew who personally disarmed a gun in his face twice. So it was that kind of guy.
Right.
So one thing he used to talk about, and I encourage people look up the name. It's William April with two L's. He's got
I'll probably have a link in the
he's
comments
got
for anybody who wants to look it
podcasts
up.
everywhere, right? If he was still
Uh-huh.
with us, we would certainly get him on the show. He talks about that once you think thoroughly through something, your brain has what he would refer to as a parking space for that problem. And if
Okay.
you've never considered it, your brain, when it sees it, it's alien, right? It's novel. So, what you want to do in your training is not only through physical training, but through your mental training of thinking through things, is you want to take the novelty out of the event. So, if you are in your workplace, in the mall, in your church, wherever, and an event happens, if you have thought
You've already
through it, if
thought
you
through it.
if you sit at your church, right? That's a perfect example because we know Stephen Williford and we've talked to him a few times
Mhm.
about that incident. One thing he mentioned that was so fascinating, Luke. Do you remember how he mentioned that on any given day there was four different men who were always carrying handguns in that church?
Yep.
That particular day, two
Not
were
that
out of
day,
town,
right?
two were running late,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So think to yourself when that guy came in rifle blazing in a fairly small church, where do you sit and what would you do? Have you thought through
I
it
don't know why this
enough?
is yeah.
Have
Yeah.
you
I don't know
th-
why this is sticking in my head,
yeah, right?
but it was around my mom's 80th birthday, so it's like a year or two ago. She wanted to take my son to church. I'm like, cool, let's go. I'll go too. I'm not very religious. I'm not religious. So I'm just sitting in church. And I just remember specifically, like pretty much that whole hour, I was just like going through shit in my head. Like, what if they come in there? What if they come in there? Or just, I don't know why I'm remembering this. You're just bringing this
Yeah.
up in the church stuff. But yeah, I just spent an hour going, what if in my head? I don't think
think
that's
of
being
how much
paranoid.
no,
No,
think of how
I
much
didn't have anything
more
else to do.
think of how much more ahead of the curve you are. And
Right.
think about it, like if you went to church every Sunday, you wouldn't have to do that every Sunday. But if one Sunday you were there, maybe choose a Sunday when the talk is particularly boring
Right. Again, I
and
wasn't
game
interested
plan
in
it.
any
Yeah,
of
yeah.
it, but I was there for
Game
my
plan
mom,
it.
and I'm
Like,
like, all
what
right.
would you do? Exactly right. You got the different senses. What would you do right now? And then
Mhm.
will that mental game plan, will it influence where you choose to sit if you have the choice, right?
For sure.
Will it influence how you position yourself so you can be watching the likely entries
Yeah.
and exits? I had this
I I
discussion.
learned that from my dad from being little. I mean,
Yeah.
never said his, back to the door and all
Mhm,
that stuff. So
mhm.
I've always been like that before
I
carrying it
am
all.
not an expert in church security. When I
Mhm.
used to do episodes for the Survival Dispatch, and I'll give kudos to them. We'll get
Yeah.
some of those guys on our show here, because they have all
Cool.
kinds of great information. There is one guy that they have pretty routinely on. His name is Keith Graves. He has, and maybe we can put this in the link for any of you who are
Sure.
churchgoers. He has a website called Christian Warrior Training, and he's got a phenomenal YouTube account where he talks about, like, every week, talking about actual incidents that happen at churches, and he dissects them. He's an ex-SWAT cop. Guy knows what he's doing,
Okay.
and his whole business now is just church security. So
Nice.
I defer to him for any kind of specialty. But I was on one of their
Right.
shows, and the host just pressed me like, okay, you're not like a church security guy, but you personally, what do you do? I don't spend a lot of time in churches, but I've been in every kind of church. I've been in, Catholic churches. I've been in Baptist churches. I've been in huge churches and small, rural churches.
Yeah.
I've been in mosques. I've been in synagogues. I've been in temples. I've been everywhere. So my reaction was, realistically, they're going to come through the back door. They're going to come through the door that everybody is giving their
Nobody's
back to.
looking at.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you had to press me where I would sit well off to one periphery or the other, more towards the back. Because when he comes in, he's going to start with the people right in front of him. And I don't want to be all the way down where now I've got, 100 people between me and him. I want to be off to the peripheries where I'm going to have a clear shot to stop him right as he comes in. That's my two
Right.
cents on it, if I have the choice.
Yeah.
Just
That's the
something
point.
I can consider with that. But think through it. I mean, that's the bottom line. Like you said, you did sitting at the church. Why don't we touch on just current conditions? And this is, again, interesting. Just to be clear with the audience, you and I talked about this initial outline in May. We were going to discuss this, and
Yeah.
then we never did. So some of this is still very relevant to what we were going to talk about roughly 6 months ago. And one of those things is current conditions in the world right now, which are raising the lone wolf threat. Do you want to touch some
Right.
on that?
Sure. I mean, you got the Israel-Palestine stuff, the war in Ukraine. We're seeing protests on that stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Israel-Palestine thing is the obvious one. Now,
Right.
very interestingly, again, not to get political or partisan, now with the administration change coming in, I think all of that is going to quiet down very quickly. Here's an interesting fact that I just read earlier today. Reuters had an article how Hezbollah in Lebanon has officially reached out to Trump saying, stop the war. Think about that, right? Okay, so, that's an American enemy. That's a designated terrorist group. Although the interesting thing about them, I remind people that, Israel's such a strong ally that, we designate terrorist groups that are really, I mean, their whole preoccupation is fighting Israel. The main reason we have had it in for them, though, historically, is they were behind the Beirut bombing of our Marine base there back in the 80s.
Okay.
Okay. So, but outside of that, it's an organization that kind of always tried to be low profile without directly antagonizing us. They would be behind things, like they sent ordnance and stuff into Iraq that was used on our soldiers, but they've been relatively low profile on directly antagonizing the United States, right? So a few things I want people to think about. Israel killed their leader, Hussein Nasrallah. So it's the devil you know, right? So Nasrallah, you know, he was what he was, but among those kind of guys, again, he kind of tried not to directly antagonize, right? So now you have a leadership change among a group that, as far as we know, dating back to the 90s, actually has cells within the United States. Okay. Think about that. So what I have been told by intelligence and special forces guys, you know, this is not my world, obviously, is that ultimately their orders will come all the way down from Iran. So what it would be is you could have the potential of terror cells activating here if Iran activates them. Iran is obviously our adversary, but once again, Iran has always played their games through proxies. They try not to directly antagonize, right? Because they would know, obviously, if they activated a cell, they're going to glow in the dark, right? So it's that weird game of cat and mouse. I think now with the new administration, things are going to simmer down very quickly, because when you have a guy with his finger on the button and they know he'll press the button, all of a sudden, like, the kids are out of the pool. You know what I mean? So hopefully things cool down, but I just want to throw that out there because it's something, unfortunately, that, especially in the past 4 years, wide open border, how many more now nefarious actors do you have who may have come in, okay, who are sitting here, possibly be waiting to be activated? Now, with that said, those are cells. The lone wolf, wolf situation, though, is always there, right? And people need to be cognizant of that. You might get the lone wolf actor who sympathizes towards one side or the other. And we've seen some violence. Do you remember? It was horrific. It was like a year ago, right after that conflict started. A guy, he was the landlord, and he killed a little Palestinian kid. It was sickening. He killed like a 6-year-old child. Okay.
I'm not ringing a bell.
Oh, yeah. This is shortly after October 7th happened. So, you know, you've always got this, like, I mean, imagine the mentality. This just an American white guy, right? It's like, how much skin do you have in the game here, man? Like, is this serious? You know, it's like, and you kill a little kid who's an American Palestinian, sickening, right? So anyway, my point is, the evil is always there, but sometimes even foreign conflicts can motivate people who are American citizens into crazy fanatical behavior. So when the world is on fire, which it has been this past year, we're at a heightened threat level for even lone wolf actors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes complete sense.
Carry your gun, be switched on, be alert to your surroundings. And this is something we should always do. But again, when we go through these especially highly volatile situations where now we've had an election, I'm very glad to see everything generally peaceful. You know, hopefully we'll have peaceful transition of power, but there's always actors on either side that could, you know, want to start trouble, whether it's on the street, rioting, etc. Or again, you just never know what gets incited. What will incite some lunatic out there just waiting to make it right for himself?
Yeah, what are they going to read? You've got this on here. What are they going to read on social media? What are they following that's going to incite them, get them riled up?
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, so let's all stay switched on. Let's carry our guns. And you know,
Well,
I always remind people, you know, if you're at ground zero at the next event, then instead of having 20, 30, 50 dead people, you might have just one dead scumbag who gets wheeled out in a bag. That's a lot better.
right. And to that point, so like, you know, you were talking about in this outline training for distance.
Yeah.
Shot. You know, there's a few things. Yeah, carry your gun and all that stuff, but training for distance, we can go over this in detail. You know, like you said, carry a capable weapon,
Yeah,
medical gear,
yeah,
and all
I
this
think
stuff.
so. And you know, I come back to it's probably the least of it. I think if you're so well ahead of the curve that if you're armed, you know, obviously if you have to deal with an active shooter, do you want to only have your J frame on you? Probably not, you know. But what I
Mhm.
would submit is even if you have only your J frame on you, go to the range and practice making headshots from the draw to a headshot at 10 yards. And with some work, J frames and little guns are hard to shoot, but even with a little gun, you'll be able to do that with some work. So, yes, we've seen things like Eli Dickens, who made his initial shots were at 42 yards or something like that.
Right.
That is the outlier. Most of the events where these guys get shut down, it's fairly close because remember, they're coming into a crowd of people that they want to start killing. You know,
Mhm.
so it's very likely he's within 10 yards of you. And he's busy looking at people running around in, you know, the cafe or in the mall, in the crowd.
Right. He's trying
And
to figure out where he's going, what's his
yeah,
next target, but you're
and
looking
you're
right at him.
standing to his side and you put one right through his temple and it's all over. You know, so
Right.
think about that. Now, with that said, I would submit that when you can carry a handgun that you put into work and can make 50-yard shots with. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I'd agree. I probably personally need to train more for distance. I'm sitting here,
And you
we're
carry
talking
a
about
dot
that.
gun, right? You carry. Does your carry
I do.
gun have a red dot?
It does. I carry a SIG 365 XL with a red dot on
Yeah,
it.
I mean, I admit that.
That's my usual. I don't carry a big Glock 19
Right,
or anything that size anymore. Just I
the
don't.
dot is a game
So that's pretty
changer.
much the biggest thing I carry. And other than that, it might be like you said, a little
Yep.
LCR.
Yep.
I just reviewed the new Smith and Wesson Bodyguard 2.0, and that thing it shoots well. So that might be a new
that's
little
really
pocket
small,
carry gun.
right?
It's really small.
Is
Yeah.
it 9mm or
But
380? That new one.
It's 380,
Okay,
and
but it should
it
work.
shoots really good.
Yeah,
Yeah, surprising. I didn't realize I was going to like it as much as I did, to be honest.
yeah. See, and that's what's important here. You know, it's like you maximize what you're carrying, train with it. I admit that my carry guns, I still don't have dots. I have dots on handguns, and I can shoot them
Mhm.
just as well. You know, I close the gap with it's just as fast and close and all that. The difference at distance, though, is incredible. Like my ability to come straight out of the leather to a 50-yard C-zone steel target like that with a dot. With this, I can do it with irons, but it takes longer. So there's huge merit to the dot. I still find the dot is a
I
bit
can't
of
see anything right now,
yeah. With
so I have to have
you
a
have to
dot.
have the dot.
I took a class with Daryl Bokey and Brian Eastridge. It was at Range Ready with KJ and them for the new Colt Python, and we were shooting. I didn't have contacts in. My shooting glasses aren't prescription.
Can't see the sights.
Doesn't usually I'm shooting with a dot, and I'm like, I can't see the sights or the fucking target.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah.
that's a problem. I'm going to get LASIK next Friday.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
what that
Okay.
literally pushed me into getting. I'm like, I don't like not being able to see.
Yeah, sure.
So-
So even with your corrective lenses, though, you're not seeing either.
I can see with my, but when I was at the range shooting, my shooting glasses
Mhm.
weren't prescriptioned, and I didn't have the day two. I popped in an old pair of contacts so I could just kind of get through the class. So I was kind of looking at pricing, like, so I live in Louisiana and Nevada, both part time.
Mhm.
So that's like 4 pairs of shooting glasses because I got tinted and
Yeah.
clear. And then I've got, my regular sunglasses. I got these glasses. I'm like, I'm going to be spending just as much
On
on new
glasses, then
lenses every
just
year
do the
in
LASIK.
LASIK.
Yeah, and yeah,
Hmm.
I mean that's the way to go, obviously. And I'll
Right.
say though, Luke, even if you can, I can see, especially in outdoor light, I can see. I'm so nearsighted that my contacts, without my contacts, it's like from here beyond is fuzzy. So the irony of
Uh-huh.
that is, with my contacts, I can see the sights clear and the target clear. I find there's a
Yeah.
huge difference though in like a low light indoor range and outdoor light. At an
Hmm.
outdoor range on a clear day, man, like 25-yard B8s are like nothing. Whereas, man, the indoor light, it's like whereas the dot
Yeah.
is much more consistent in light. So there's a lot
Right.
of advantages there. There's
I was getting through that first day, and literally the end of the first day, they're like, "We're gonna do some accuracy drills from whatever yards," and I was like, "Shit,
yeah,
I'm gonna flunk because I can't see anything." Right. So it was eye opening, no pun
yeah,
intended.
no
So
question. So consider those things. Obviously, we'll just hit on it. We don't have to talk about it much. Carry medical, man. Carry medical.
we talk about that every time, but we should. Like,
Yeah.
you're more likely to use
Yep.
something in your
Absolutely.
medical than using your gun. I almost pulled over the other day. We passed a bad wreck, and I was looking. I saw somebody crying. The guys were up at the truck's window as an older lady, and I stopped and looked, and looks like she was just kind of grabbing at her chest from the airbag exploding. I didn't see any blood or anything, so I kept going. But I was like, all right, well, I might need to grab the tourniquets out back first aid kit and get to work. But
Yeah, and
luckily
that
I didn't.
happens
But yeah,
so often. I remember Spencer Keepers, great shooter. We had him
mhm,
several times on the old show.
yeah,
He has an incident on the highway. He went and helped the guy, and like there was neck injury and stuff, and he held him, still till first responders got there. Like, we're more likely to come upon that, obviously, than even
mhm,
use it in violence. One thing I'll throw out, and I'll give credit to an excellent TCCC course that I took through Green Ops training, which is Mike Green's company. It's right
yeah,
here in my neck of the woods. But that guy, he was an ex military medic, like real been there, done that guy. One
okay,
thing he kept reminding everybody, he said, when these events happen, you are a shooter first.
hmm,
You've got to
right,
shut the perpetrator down before you're bending over and tending to people. And sometimes that's counterintuitive. You might have to step over people who are wounded and calling for help and go find that guy and kill him before you
yeah, it
get
makes
into that.
sense.
So bear that in mind. You're
Stop
going to
more
be,
people from being
yeah,
wounded.
you're going to be a shooter first. Bear in mind, are you somewhere with your family? That's going to be your priority. I can tell you, if I'm on somewhere and I hear shooting start and I'm with the family, getting the family out, that's the priority. If I'm alone
Yeah,
and
for sure.
well armed, it might be very different. I might walk to the sound of the guns. Man, I don't care where I am. If I've got the family with me, that's not how it's going down. So these are things though
Yeah,
you just have to think through them beforehand.
yeah. I was literally. I don't know if this quite applies, but there was a video I saw today, and I was thinking about doing a video about it. Um, it was a school principal dropping a kid off at his house from after school, and there's ring footage of this. Kid opens up the door. The principal's in his truck or car waiting for him. Kid goes in. I think the parents were away on vacation or something along those lines. Kid goes in. There's somebody in the fucking house in a couch. Kid runs out, hops over the bush, tells principal, son, my house is being robbed. He gets his gun and goes in there, and all went well. The guy's like, "Oh, I'm not
Right.
dangerous," and the cops come and get him. But I'm like, I'm looking at it, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm running in that house with my gun. The kid, there's nobody in the house other than whoever's not supposed to be in there. I don't know if I'm going to run in there with a gun. How do you know how many people are in there? We talk about this all the time. Like, are they armed? How many people are there?
You don't know what
Just
you're walking
you
into.
got the kid. The kid's safe. Call the
That's all that
cops.
matters.
You know.
This is a mentality that people cannot get past. The idea that it's your domain, it's your property, you're going to confront. What is there worth it if your loved ones
That
are
wasn't
safe?
even his property at
Yeah,
this point.
it's
That's
just lunacy.
some other
It's
family's
lunacy.
property.
You know,
You know. Which, I mean, I can commend him for like, doing it. So I'm not talking shit on him. I just wouldn't do
No,
it.
and
Like,
think about this. What if it went south and okay, obviously you can get maimed or killed yourself, but what if you killed a guy in
Mhm.
there? Do you want to go through the legal ordeal to go protect
No,
some other guy's TV?
right.
It's absurd. My own kid, we had this discussion recently. He asked me, my home is 3 levels, so it's like you got a lot
Right.
to think about with the entrances and what you would do. And he said, "What would you do if home invaders came in?" I said, "Well, that depends on where everybody is at the time."
Hmm.
And he said, "Well, what if it's middle of the night and we're all because all bedrooms." One thing I like about a house that I specifically, for me is a big part of a house is I like the bedrooms on an upper level if it's a multi-level house and all the bedrooms on that level. Because
Right. Living area,
what
first
it makes
floor,
so much
bedroom,
easier
second floor.
is I told him, I said,
Yeah.
well, if it's 3 in the morning and everyone's asleep and everybody's upstairs, then I come right to my door frame at the top of those stairs, and anybody who comes up the stairs gets killed. And
Right.
we call 911.
Families behind you.
If they don't come up
Right.
the stairs, then they can take anything they want out of the house. That's what insurance
Hmm.
is for. I don't care what they
Right.
take, but they can't come up those stairs. They come up the stairs, they die. It's that simple, you
Right.
know. So yeah,
Yeah.
and again, there's another example. You just need to think through it. Give it some thought. And then when you think through it, it applies anywhere you are. The example I've used in the past is we all go to the stop and rob. There's a reason that gas stations are called
Hmm.
stop and rob because they get robbed all the
I
time, right? So
I literally just
yes.
did an article on one. It was called the Duck and Go.
Yeah. Hey, and it
I
was
think that's it
stopped and
itself.
robbed that it's called the duck and go.
Yeah,
Imagine.
but the clerk shot the guy, so hooray for him. So he won.
Yeah, happy ending. Okay. So,
Yeah.
it's like when you're in the gas station, just think to yourself, if I'm standing here at the coffee machine and
Hmm.
dudes come through there and put a gun in the clerk's face, what am I going to do? And what you will find though, if you just think through it, most gas stations are kind of similar the way they're laid out. So once you've thought through it, you kind of have a rough game plan that can be applied to any particular gas station you're in.
Right.
So it's the same with the lone wolf threat. Just give it thought, stay armed, stay prepared.
Be aware of shit. Like, I feel like we talk about medical and this stuff every episode, but
It always comes
don't be
back.
staring
Yeah,
at your phone while you're pumping gas. Like,
yes.
be aware of shit, looking around.
Yep. No doubt
You know,
about it.
make eye contact with people if they're, whatever. I was pumping gas a couple months ago, and I see this homeless woman start coming. She's mumbling stuff, and then she makes eye contact with me. She gets close, and I hear something about money. I'm like, loudly enough. Nope, I
Yeah.
can't help you. Nope, I can't help you. I think 3 times, and she got the point and went around, and I watched her go in. I finished the gas, and I got out. Like, I wasn't scared. I didn't think I was about to get robbed, but just keep your distance away. I can't help you. Go. If I would have been staring at my phone, it
Right.
might have been, oh shit, right there. Or somebody else would have been. So just shit like that.
And it's always the same principle. It's like, the phone. I mean, the phone is the most horrendous thing when it comes to this, right? You're staring at the phone, and imagine looking up like this to a knife or a gun in your face. Whereas,
Yeah.
if you weren't staring at the phone, you probably saw the sketchy looking guy all the way across the parking lot, and you could put yourself in
Right.
position now to deal with that. So it's
I think I'd spotted her before she got up and started coming at us. So that's just, I'm standing between at the pump. The hose is on the left of me. My driver's doors, so I don't have to hop over a fucking hose to get in the car. Stupid stuff, but that's little things I think about. I want to be able to get in my car and get out as quick as possible, and just looking around constantly. Not like a paranoid person, but I'm just scanning everything, looking.
I did.
This becomes
Look,
habit.
you remind me of an exact situation. I actually did a 2-part article on this incident. One part was on USA Carry, and one part we did on Ammo Land or something. It was like a
Okay.
collaboration thing. So anyway, it was like a non-event, but the reason I wrote about it and then went into all the, awareness principles and stuff, but
Mhm.
the event itself was a perfect example because of how long before the interaction happened that I actually saw it coming. I was at many years
Right.
ago, this is, 12, 15 years ago, at a gas station as usual, right? Back then I was in the pocket carried revolver phase. And
Okay.
I literally see this guy across the highway before he even gets into the parking lot of the gas station. He looks sketchy. Like he looks like a street person, but like something's up, right? And I see this dude
Right.
at like 50 or 60 yards away as he's crossing the highway. So I predict he's making a beeline to me. Sure enough, he did. So when I see him, I position myself on the other side of the gas hose, just like you said, and
Hmm.
my hand's already in my pocket on my snub. And
Yeah.
where I'm standing, I can either move right over here to be behind the pump or right over here to be behind the car. And sure enough, he approached
Right.
me and he funneled right in. And I'm in a position where the gas line is between us, and I've got 2 points of cover right next to me. And it was the same ordeal. And he was really aggressive. I said, I can't help you. And I'm thinking to myself,
Hmm.
like, this dude is beyond dead if he tries anything. And he doesn't even realize it. I just look like a guy with my hand in my pocket. So sure enough, then he screws off. And what was interesting is
Hmm.
I leave the, after I fill up, I couldn't see him where he went, get in my car. And as I'm pulling out, I see him walk up to this woman who's on her phone, and she turns around and he's
Mm.
right there in her face, and like she freaks out just seeing this guy. He's really, disheveled, weird looking, right? And she's like
Right.
stunned, like a deer caught in the headlights. And I didn't say anything further to him. I just stopped and I was looking at him, so he saw me looking at him, and he turned and he walked off, right? And there's a
Nice.
perfect example. So it's not as much about the gun in your waistband or in your pocket as it is actually see it coming. Because if you see it 50 yards
Yep.
away, it's much less of an issue.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yep.
And
So I think we hit on a lot of stuff, some that is related to just self-defense in general, but hopefully that gives people a good idea of what the lone wolf threat is. And it's constant, comes from every demographic. Again, I remind people of that. Certain world events might incite more from a particular group of people just based on what's going on. But even that, honestly, when we're talking about actual American citizens, again, people who want to disparage the United States, man, our citizens assimilate. It's not like what you see in European countries and stuff. And that is such
right.
an interesting fact, is how our whole population, when it comes to mass violence, is almost even across all demographics. So you've got to bear that in mind. There's a certain level of lunatics in any demographic. We're a big country. We've got 340 million people, however it is. Anywhere you go, anything you're doing, it's possible. It's very unlikely, but it's always possible. Stay switched on. That's all. That's the last I have to say about it.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much it. Just, not saying walk around being paranoid every day, but just be aware, carry your gun, carry your pepper spray,
Yep.
carry your medical.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. So is that about
So
it? Can you think of anything else?
I think that's all I got. I was just going to mention, if anybody wants one of these cool hats that I have on, you had on, you can go to store.usacarry.com. There's shirts and stuff there too. And if you're listening to this or watching on YouTube, subscribe. You can also get this. It'll probably be on Facebook and Apple Music and wherever else you can get the audio podcast. So subscribe. It helps.
Yeah,
You want
absolutely.
to leave a review, that helps too.
And we're
We have a hard time getting out to you guys sometimes with Facebook and stuff like that.
yeah,
So
they can always hit the
all the
site, of
engagement
course,
helps.
right? So
Yeah.
we'll be back to this hopefully. I think we're pretty casual about it. So
Yeah.
they can find it, of course, in all the usual podcast places, the USA Carry YouTube channel, and you typically still run them on the main site too, Luke.
Yeah, it'll be on usacarry.com. There's a podcast tab on there. They'll be there as well. And
share it with your friends,
yeah.
Your friends who could
Yes.
benefit from the information, and hopefully we'll have a lineup of great guests as usual. We'll start lining up.
Yeah, we have I think we got a couple guests lined up and other shows already in the works. So yeah.
We'll be back.
Hopefully we're back again.
Yes, yeah. Until we get bored of it. No, we'll try not to this time. So we'll bring you some great guests soon. So thanks, everybody. Have a great evening. Stay safe.
Yep. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.